Hello, I'm Stephen Ang, and welcome to another review. This tragedy is called What a Wonderful Day in the Neighborhood. Let's begin. So, what this diarrhea is about is it's about Mr. Rogers, and he has a friend, and his friend has problems with his father, and it's about Mr. Rogers being cool, like he is or was, and helping this guy out. This was a fucking sellout, man. Sellout. Here's what you did, studio. You said, we're gonna take this creative piece of shit that doesn't need to be made, and the only way we're gonna sell it is we're gonna get Tom Hanks. Yeah, Tom. And we're gonna pretend to make it about Mr. Rogers. This movie has nothing to fucking do with Mr. Rogers. So Mr. Rogers is trying to help this guy out. Excuse me. It spends a lot of time trying to help this guy. When in fact, hello, he was about children. Not about fucking people that are all hurt and broken and have problems. He was about children. So the fact he spent most of his time in this movie trying to cheer up this asshole was ridiculous. So this asshole that's in the movie is real upset with his father because his father cheated on his mother when she was sick, and that's understandable. But there are moments in this film where he leaves his wife and brand new baby to go off and be bitter and angry. And then Mr. Rogers says a few things. Well, that's your father, you know? And all of a sudden, clicks in his head, I need to be a better man. And he ends up going to go visit his wife, and they forgive each other, and then he goes to visit his father. And if this movie was like Walk the Line, the story of Johnny Cash, or Bohemian Rhapsody, or Get On Up, whatever the movie was called about James Brown, if it was about Mr. Rogers, it would have been great. And I mean his life. This wasn't about his life. This was a fictional bullshit story using Mr. Rogers to sell, and Tom Hanks. Personal note, you don't have to love everybody. If you hate your father, and you feel like you have a good reason to, hate your father. You don't need to love everybody in the world. This movie advertised as something about Mr. Rogers' life, and it wasn't. It's about this guy. And part of it, a lot of it, is very artsy and visual, but it makes no fucking sense to... It should have been its own film instead of bringing Mr. Rogers in it. There are moments where they bring in the puppets that he would use in the TV show, and they made it weird. Like the guy was tripping out on Mr. Rogers and seeing the cat and seeing the puppets and just tripping, which just to me didn't make any goddamn sense. Mr. Rogers spent most of his time trying to fix children, going to court and talking about how the TV show and how TV and all these things can change how a child thinks, and he was trying to give positive messages to children. So the fact he takes all the time in the world just for this one guy that has a problem with his father is utterly, again, ridiculous. His father, by the way, is trying to make up with him the whole movie, which is more than my father has ever done. So the guy really is an asshole, and I didn't feel for him at all. I thought he was an asshole, selfish, and kind of like a child. And his wife, in the end, when his father gets sick and passes out and ends up in the hospital, his wife and his child spend the night at the hospital the whole time, not him. He goes off to do another interview with Mr. Rogers, because that's why he's involved with Mr. Rogers, is to interview him and see if he's a real, if he really is who he is, like the TV show, which I really think he was. And I don't think he was gay, but that doesn't matter. But I don't think he was gay. But people think that because of how kind he was and how sweet and caring he was, that he must have been gay. I don't think he was gay, but I think he was a genuinely sweet man. And they did show that in this film, but I think what it was focusing on was absolute garbage. This movie should have been called Two Tails in the Sun. Something else. It had nothing to do with Tom Hanks. Had nothing to do with Mr. Rogers. I can't believe Tom Hanks did this and they wasted his talent on this bullshit. Because if they're gonna do a film about Mr. Rogers, at least get a guy that sounds like him and looks like him. Tom Hanks is heavy, and Mr. Rogers wasn't. He was thin. So, but oh wait a second, this was just to get money because you used two big names in a pointless story that didn't need to be told, and try to make money off of Mr. Rogers' dead body. And as if you know, Mr. Rogers went into basically solace when he had cancer and passed away by himself, basically, or alone in privacy. So this movie just felt like it didn't need to be made. They already made a goddamn documentary about Mr. Rogers, and it was great. That one was great. But this one, What a Wonderful Day in the Neighborhood, this was really just like a real desperate attempt to make more money, and they just used two big names. Everybody loves Mr. Rogers, and everybody loves Tom Hanks. So this movie, I think, was a real piece of shit. I suggest you avoid it at all cost. If you see it in Walmart for sale, take a gun and shoot it. If you bought it, burn it. And maybe just go visit Mr. Rogers' place where he's buried or wherever the fuck, and give him your condolences. But they just basically jizzed all over Mr. Rogers for money. That's what this was. So good job.